and suddenly my Bible went from black and white to color. I started actually taking out credit cards and maxing them out so that I could go and travel to the lands of the Bible any way that was possible.
You have the Holy Spirit. Why do you need to go there?
I'm supposed to live my life today as if it's my very last day, each and every day until the Lord calls me home.
This battle is not between flesh and blood.
Yeah.
This battle is between the darkness, the principalities, the spiritual realm. Unless they accept and surrender their life to Christ, they will be separate.
The emphasis on Jesus's ministry is the fact that the individual is valuable to God because they are made in the image of God.
Well, Talking Church, I'm excited for the second episode of this theology series, and today I am joined with Jeremy Stein, who is the director of the Center for Holy Land Studies. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad you're in town. We talked about this. We got to get you on the podcast. And then you were in Minnesota like a month later.
Yep.
So thank you.
Oh, hey, I'm so excited to be here. This is super exciting for me.
Now talk about your role. Talk about the Center for Holy Land Studies. For those who clicked on this episode, they're obviously interested in learning more about Israel. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But you don't just have a theological perspective. You have a very physical perspective because it's your job.
It is. Yeah. The Center for Holy Land Studies is a ministry out of the National Office of the Assemblies of God that focuses on connecting people to the world and the lands of the Bible for the purpose of discipleship and growth, specifically in biblical literacy inside our churches. And of course, we go to anywhere where the Bible takes place and was written. So Italy, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Cyprus, Jordan, but most importantly, Israel. That's the place where obviously we have the most of the Bible that takes place and happens. And that's the place that most people are drawn to begin with. It's the kind of, when we talk about the progression of where people should go on their journeys when they're going to the lands of the Bible, we tell them to start off in Israel to understand the life and the ministry of Jesus and what takes place inside the final week of Jesus and unpack that in the Gospels and why the gospel spreads the way that it does. And so it becomes very much of a core of who we are. And bringing people through a process of first discovery of the world of the Bible and understanding why it's so important for them to be there, but then also deepening their faith so that the church can then further disciple them and use them as a discipling instrument for others who have yet to make that journey. And so we spend a lot of time in Israel with many different churches, and especially with student groups. That's one of our big focuses. We take an annual trip called Bible Lands, which focuses on the next generation of pastors. These are your university students who are going to be filling the pulpit in the next 10 to 20 years and getting them acquainted with the lands of the Bible. This year, for example, we're doing Israel, so that they have that interaction, that knowledge before they even get to the pulpit and start preaching the text.
Yeah, it's something for me when I went with the center and a number of years ago, and I think it was 9 or 10 years ago. So I need to get back.
Yeah.
But it just, I'm a visual person. And so seeing where the Garden of Gethsemane probably was and seeing Jerusalem and just visualizing it, I feel like gives such a different perspective. And absolutely. I remember saying to my dad that he was on that trip with us, and I said, "What? I feel like every Christian should be required to go."
Yes.
And he's like, "Well, okay, it's not quite like the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. It's not quite like that. It's more of helping to understand in a better way and acknowledging this is where Jesus walked." I mean, I believe the Holy Spirit lives inside of me. So it is kind of this interesting thought of like, oh, I want to go where Jesus walked, where some people say, you have the Holy Spirit. Why do you need to go there? But I think it's more about, like you said, understanding, and it comes alive. What about going there made you want to do this? Was this like your aspiration as a kid? I want to be a guide and teaching people through the lands of the Bible, or was there a moment that made you say, all right, this is what I'm going to do with my life?
So I had no aspirations to do this at all, even through Bible college. So in Bible college, I went with a focus on pastoral ministries and biblical theology. And I kind of figured that I was going to go through the progression of I'll be a youth pastor, then I'll be a senior pastor, and we'll just go from there. And when I graduated college, I went on the Center for Holy Land Studies Bible Lands program, the one that goes for the college students, and just to kind of give myself a graduation present. And I said, okay, this will be fun to go on. I've heard other students have gone on it. And I went and it absolutely rocked my world. We oftentimes say seeing is believing. When it comes to Israel and it comes to the lands of the Bible, seeing is understanding. And suddenly my Bible went from black and white to color. Suddenly it became alive in such a new way. And I understood the text and the narrative and God's call for my life that much more. And so I came back. I actually got engaged on that trip to now my wife. And I came back and I basically told her, I said, I want to do that for a living. And she's like, that's not a job.
You proposed in Israel?
I proposed in Israel. Yeah.
Wow. Well, no wonder it has so much significance.
And so she, and I had just started a youth pastor position. And I basically said, yeah, I'm going to now go to grad school for something completely different. I want to focus on the origins of Judaism or the origins of Christianity and ancient Judaism and archaeology. And she's like, you're crazy. This is nuts. But I kind of knew that that's what God was calling me towards. And after a progression, I started actually taking out credit cards and maxing them out so that I could go and travel to the lands of the Bible any way that was possible. And I don't suggest that for anybody. I mean, it wrecked my credit score.
It's no wonder you and Pastor Rob get along, though. You love just starting your dreams on credit cards.
Exactly. So, yeah. And so I just made it my point to be there as much as I could and interact with the land and grow my passion and love for it, that it actually did develop into what I love to do and what I get to have my life doing and serving the church with.
Was there a moment for you that particularly stuck out there that was an aha? You talk about your Bible going from black and white to color. I know for me, when I was in the Garden of Gethsemane or right around the Mount of Olives area, praying and we all went and prayed. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, Jesus, this is where you once and for all kind of decided that it was going to happen. Of course, it was decided from the beginning of time, mm-hmm. but I think of the humanness of Jesus and the anguish that he felt, mm-hmm. and then being in that spot to say, right here was this conversation with the Father that you chose me, you chose us, mm-hmm. you chose to die in my place, and then walk the Via Dolorosa and get killed. It was just like this moment, because even the Golgotha, where it is like not entirely certain, and there's but knowing this area, like Jesus was here. I don't know, there's just something about that. Was there something for you when you were there that just came alive, that made your faith more real or made the Bible more real? Or was it just an overall, like there's too many moments to describe?
I would say is that there are moments that I can remember having those aha type parts. I remember, for example, and Megiddo and then Lachish, two Old Testament sites, but piecing together the history and what was taking place and understanding, having that moment that God was supernaturally interacting with history for the purpose of not just salvation, but even my salvation. And so it was that collection of moments. But I'll tell you this, is that even as I have been back now, I can't even count how many times I've been back, I still have those moments. As I continue to learn, as I continue to grow and just have experiences with every group that I go with, I get asked all the time, well, how doesn't this get old to you? And it's because the land is so rich and the Spirit is just dwelling there, that it's a new understanding and a new growth moment every time with every new group I go with, because every group is so different, and no campus is going to be the same of any church. No church is going to be the same, and what people are going through in specific times is always very different. And so hearing how they're processing through the lands the text of the Bible and seeing that come alive through their witness and their understanding, it absolutely changes things again and again, and it grows me in that aspect where I have those moments that re-solidifies and reaffirms why I get to do what I get to do. I think and I can think of them off the top of my head again and again. I think of a time that I was with a couple from your church, actually your campus, that they received their call to ministry at Alexandria Troas, where you have Paul receiving his call to a Macedonian man, and watching them through the process of it forsake everything of their life and up and sell their business and everything in their house and move to Morocco. That's a powerful moment as the one who is walking through this again and again, because that's something that every time now I go to that site with any other group, it's on the forefront of my mind, and it gives me an oomph to really preach the gospel and preach what we're called to do in Acts that much more, knowing that there are those who have seen or heard from God in that moment and done that. And so it's things like that that continues to make that solidification of this is why I want to do this with my all.
Yeah, I think the same can be true about pastoral ministry in a church, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, why do you keep teaching that course? Well, because there's people that lives are continued to be changed in that course or that text or that book or whatever it is. You know, you think about books that are hundreds of years old or thousands of years old that are still changing lives today. Obviously, the topic of Israel as a nation and as a people group has not gone out of our news ever, particularly because of the war and the continual wars. There's new wars, there's old wars, there's probably future wars. I mean, it's obviously there's prophecy. There's a lot of conversations about this. One of the things recently, I was actually in Jordan on October 7th.
Oh, wow.
And so we were right next door. And we landed on the 6th in Jordan and had an amazing Yemeni restaurant. And I remember that restaurant so vividly. It was so good. I just want to go back there so bad. But the next morning, you know, it's a normal day and we're getting ready for this global team in Jordan. And then, of course, start hearing about this crazy tragedy that's happening. And there's this dichotomy of the people in America are texting us and saying, we're hearing about what's happening. There's the people that are in Jordan that are hearing about what's happening. There's the media there that, you know, the region well. They're not very pro-Israel. Jordan is kind of a gray area in the sense of their government is friendly enough. Their people are definitely not friendly to those of Israel. So I saw people in the streets actually celebrating what was happening, celebrating that there were Jewish people that were killed. You had others, though, that were sobered and realizing that, okay, this is bad, this is war, this is evil. People that understood the humanity of it. And then you had others that were strongly condemning it. Ironically, you know, at the time of this release, you know, a few weeks ago, we saw, you know, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Kind of a similar feeling is you had people that were mourning, you had people that were in the middle and had felt the tension, and you had others that were celebrating. And so I am kind of in this middle of thinking about these things, but that brought up a lot of conversation. I know I'm talking a long time here, but I'm setting up this time to. It's brought up conversations. Who should we support as Americans? There's people in the other parts of the world that say, oh, you Americans are Zionists and you view things very differently. The evangelical, the Pentecostal church views things very differently. The very famous interaction between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, where Ted was talking about how we should support and bless Israel, couldn't really remember what verse it was, kind of was trapped in that moment. Tucker, I think, was asking legitimate questions. The thing that I noticed, though, as a pastor in the church, is there's a split in generations. Assemblies of God in general is very supportive of the nation of Israel and the people of Israel. But you do have this generational divide. Part of that's through social media. Part of that's through the theology in which people are viewing the wars that they're experiencing, and also just social media in general. We all saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We're all seeing clips come from Israel and Gaza and bombs, whereas in the past, you maybe weren't seeing it in that way. Maybe you'd see a newspaper photo or you'd see a clip on the news, but you're watching in real time people dying and hurting. And so I think it brings up this far greater emotion and sense of identification to these people. So again, that's a broad overview. But how do you see, and I'm sure I'll have a ton of questions, but how do you see even yourself with this dichotomy as you're bringing people there, as you're traveling there a lot, that you do have, again, I'm a broad brush, or the older generation that feels this is a fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel 36 and 37. This is the nation that we should protect, regardless of whether or not they are, you know, followers of Jesus. This is God's land that he promised to Abraham. And then you have others that say, well, look at the evil and the wickedness and the terror and the mockery of God in some senses, or very pro-LGBTQ, or all these things. How do I reconcile that? So I've asked you a question that probably takes 20 years to answer, but where do we start when that question's brought up?
I think to start is if you look at the history of Israel overall from the Old Testament period on, is that Israel is going to have times of wickedness. And times of destruction and times where evil is being done, but you also have to realize that God still has a plan for Israel through it all. And that's, I think, one of the most confusing parts for the church right now. And this is where you really have the rise of replacement theology, this idea of, well, how could this, what we see, have anything to do with what God's plan is? And
can you describe replacement theology for those who maybe don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. Replacement theology is this idea that Israel and the plan that we see for Israel no longer exists, and that the church has supplanted Israel and is the new Israel, which doesn't have any true grounding inside biblical theology, what we read about in the New Testament, inside Pauline theology especially. But it's very popular, especially inside Reformed circles right now, and it's become incredibly at the forefront of conversation in the last 2 years. And it's mainly because of reactionary feelings, like you said, what we see on the news and what we see in social media in that aspect. But what we see Paul writing about, especially in Romans, when he's writing to his fellow Jews who are in the church of Rome, talking about Israel and where they stand in it all, he makes the statement that the church is grafted into the tree that is Israel. And when we're talking agricultural terminology inside the biblical world, we have to have the mindset of that. And you can't graft something that is a living branch into a dead tree and expect it to live. It's not going to happen. And so the idea that Paul is saying that God still has a plan for Israel no matter what. And we've seen the ups and downs of Israel as a people group throughout history. I mean, they get kicked out of the land by the Romans in 135, 136 AD, and then not returning until really the early 1900s, but more so in force as a result of World War II, establishing the state of Israel that we know today. And we have to understand, or at least create some level of dichotomy between the people of Israel and the nation of Israel that we see today, because the nation of Israel in its establishment is a secular state. Even though you have this idea of we're Jewish, the amount of those who are actually practicing Judaism is going to be significantly less. Most of the people, for example, that we interact with daily when we have groups inside Israel are not practicing. They are Jewish in heritage. They will take worship on the high holy days, if you can even call it that, but they're not engaging inside synagogue and Torah study and things like that. And that's more of the minority of the population. And as a result, they have two very different world views. And
even on the October 7th, it was Shabbat, I believe. Mm-hmm. And, it was a music festival. So it's definitely a little bit different than maybe a traditional Orthodox Jew that would be, practicing Shabbat.
Absolutely. You wouldn't find any there. And you see the emphasis of secularism right there. It's a perfect example, because that's, the Nova Festival is similar to like a Burning Man or something like that. And it is this reality of you're dealing with two different worlds, and it's hard for the church to sometimes rectify that. Like, I've heard the people that have literally preached about, well, October 7th was God's judgment on Israel because of what was taking place at the Nova Festival and things like that. And I strongly disagree with that. It's the result of incredibly wicked and evil people trying to thwart the plans of God. One thing that I have said again and again since October 7th, because I'll be honest, right after October 7th happened, I had tons of requests to come and explain this to my church, explain this to this church or that church. And I kept on saying, we have to realize this in the context of fuller theology, is that God makes a promise with Abraham that his people will be as numerous as the sands of the earth and will be prosperous inside this land. And the world in its fallen state will always try to thwart the plans of God, because if you can thwart the plans of God, then God is not a promise-keeping God, and he's no longer God. And so the world is always going to rage against Israel, no matter where they are, whether it's inside the land or outside of the land. And we see that through the course of history, whether it's through medieval times and through the Crusaders wiping out the Jewish people, or during the Holocaust or the Spanish Inquisition and things of that nature. And so we have this reality that even though they're back in the land has nothing really to do with it except an extra tier of trying to thwart God's promise and God's plan. And when you look at how Israel ends up in the land, they're simply taking back land that was taken from them by the Romans and then the Muslims and so on and so forth. And so you have to look at it in that greater context, but also you have to realize is that not everybody who is involved in this wants to be involved in it and is involved in all of this for the same reason. When you look at how the breakup is of people, Palestinian is not something that is so dead set in what X, Y, and Z is. You can be Palestinian Christian. You can be Palestinian Muslim. Even in some communities, you can be Palestinian Jewish. It sounds strange, but somebody who's Palestinian is somebody whose ancestors were there when it was the British Mandate of Palestine. And so it's more of a political designation that has a very different feel to it as to why war is taking place and why October 7th took place, and how you have Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and Palestinians in the West Bank. They view things and see things very different. And so trying to understand the whole quagmire that is this situation that has unraveled as a result of October 7th is very challenging for the church. And it's challenging for young people, especially because we get our information from all these different sources on social media that it's impossible for us to police. We can't know exactly what is true and what's not without being just absolutely associated with all of it. And so we get all of these things and we're getting what somebody wants us to see. Like anything with the news is always going to be selling us a story. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, it's always going to be selling us something that's going to make us engage, make us click, because that's how they drive up revenue. And at the end of the day, that's what they're there for. They don't care if you know the truth or not. And we've seen this again and again in Israel when we've taken groups there and they've said, well, I've heard X, Y, and Z on this social media platform. And you have to show them, no, look, this is not true. This isn't the reality. Somebody has either showed you a shot that is from another time, another place, or they have cut everything else out of the frame so that you can see what they want you to see. And so we're being fed something to create a narrative based off what somebody wants us to know. And the only way to truly understand it is going to the land and hearing from the people on both sides and how they interact with what's taking place and how they understand it.
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated, and I think the pushback that some might say is, okay, fair enough, but who's to say that that's not what the other side is doing? Who's to say that, sure, if one side can manipulate, the other side can certainly manipulate 100%. As well. And so, having spent a lot of time in the Arab countries surrounding Israel, actually far more, about 10-1 for me, more there, you hear a bunch of different perspectives that is very contradictory.
Yes.
And so certainly I think there's I don't know if empathy is the right word, but there's a dichotomy of what people are viewing is different. And I think that's what makes it hard for particularly young people, but those who, I myself, I feel like I hear a lot of, well, this is what we believe. And of course, almost looking at me like I'm stupid asking these questions. And I think that's, again, kind of looking back at that like Ted Cruz and Tucker debate. Like Tucker was asking questions that I think to me were good questions. Now, Ted, I don't think did a very good job defending himself.
Yes.
But I think those are the things that young people are asking that, at least in my view, and again, I know I'm sympathetic to it because I am one of those people, they feel like good questions. And I think sometimes I feel, and maybe I'm painting too broad of a brush, but that it is what are you talking? They're wrong, they're bad, and it's very much here's why they're wrong, and not here's why we're right.
Yes,
and I see that a lot. I was obviously doing a lot of research here, and one of the things that was interesting to me, you talk about this rise of replacement theology, which again doesn't seem to make sense to me as I read through Romans.
Yeah.
But N.T. Wright talks about, no, it's not a replacement, it's an enlargement. So he kind of paints this middle ground to say, Jesus is the fulfillment of Israel. And so now this enlargement to the Gentile people, it's not replacement, it's enlargement. There's not dual covenant. There's so many things here. So how would you, again, we talked about maybe the here's what we shouldn't believe.
Yeah.
What would you say is the foundation for, no, this is, I reject replacement theology, but here's what I support?
It's a great question because a lot of people don't even know why they support what they support. And I think like Ted Cruz is the definite example. It's just what I've been told. There are two aspects of it. I'd say that there's definitely the spiritual / religious aspect, and there's what I would call the realist aspect. The realist aspect is based off of what we have seen inside places like Syria, places like Lebanon, that when you get a terrorist organization like ISIS, which would be very similar to Hamas, when it gets control of an area that has significance to the Jewish people and to the Christian people ourselves, what do is that they absolutely destroy it. They desecrate it so that there is no memory of that. We look at not even Christian sites, but ancient Roman sites like Palmyra in Syria that got just absolutely destroyed. And one of the biggest aspects about coming to these places, like I said earlier, is seeing is understanding, and getting to see a synagogue from the first century allows us to see how Jesus is engaging with his followers. And when Luke and Matthew tell us that he is preaching in all these synagogues, and that's one of the hearts of it, it allows us to understand and see the message. And so it's simply just protecting these places. And Israel is going to be the people group that is going to do that, because there is that shared heritage, but also there is freedom of religion inside Israel. Yes, it is a Jewish state, but we have missionaries in Israel and Christian communities in Israel, and you have entirely Muslim communities, and you have Druze communities that all freely practice. No matter what the media might tell us, we know firsthand from groups going over there, they all freely practice. And you don't have that inside the areas controlled by the Palestinian Authority and inside the Gaza Strip. Yes, you have Christians that are there, but they're persecuted. Well, we hear it firsthand. We take groups that go into Bethlehem and we hear what the Palestinian Authority is up to and what it does to the families. And it's not persecution the way that we think of oftentimes. It is like the dragging people out and beating them in the streets or something. It's economic persecution. You can only hold this job. You can only work in tourism. Then when there's no tourism like this, who's the one that suffers the most? But when there's tourism, they become the face, and suddenly everybody thinks that the Palestinian territories are these great places. And so you see this reality of, here's a people group that does not act kindly towards anybody else, that really does not want to see anybody else thrive that's not them, especially those who are our brothers and sisters in Christ. And then you have the other side of the coin of a people group that, yes, they're Jewish, they're different, but they allow not just the existence, but the thriving. Our churches are growing. Discipleship is happening because Israel allows us to come into the country and to see their sites and to see and engage with our history that's shared. We share the same book, the Old Testament, and that's no small thing. And so that's the realist perspective. But then there's also the biblical perspective of asking myself, okay, do I believe in the promises of God all the way back in Genesis? If so, then I have to understand that God has his plan for Israel. But that doesn't give us the freedom to look away to much of the things that were happening. There's no question that there are atrocities that are happening. It's war. Atrocities happen in war no matter what. The U.S. committed atrocities inside World War II, as did Japan, as did Germany, as did France, as did Great Britain. It's the realities of war. War is disgusting, it's ugly, but it's something that has happened since the start of mankind. Now, one of the things that we don't often see is Israel's attempt to fight a war that is honorable, I would say. Israel will always, and you'll see it sometimes on social media, but they'll tell people where they're about to attack, where they're going to bombard, where things are going to happen. And because Hamas has control of a lot of what takes place inside Gaza, they will keep people inside that area so that they become collateral damage, which then works towards pushing their agenda. When you have one group of people that cares very deeply about the individual's lives and another group that could care less, that should tell us a little bit about what we should be dealing with as the church, because the emphasis on Jesus's ministry is the fact that the individual is valuable to God because they are made in the image of God. And that is something that Israel has never forgotten. And the evidence is, if you look at the hostage negotiations that have taken place, how many people have been released to the Palestinian side in exchange for Israelis? You will find Israel handing over hundreds, if not thousands of terrorists for singular individuals. Why is that? Because there is something that is instilled in Israel that we share as the church state. It's the value of the individual that you do not have in those who oppose Israel. And so when you look at that from a theological perspective, that should be the first key, that there should be a side of something that we should be looking at. Now, as I've said, we've got to look at that with a skew, because are you going to have people in the secular government of Israel that are going to look for malice and destruction and seek that out on the Palestinians? 110%. But that's human nature. That's not necessarily something that is identifying of a people group. How many Christians did atrocities in the name of Christ over the generations? You look at the popes over the course of Christian history, and you look at Pope Innocent, for example, who was horrific, or you look at the things
ironic name.
Yeah, exactly. That's always why I love him, why I go to him in my classes. And you're going to find it everywhere. You're going to find Christian nations that have done horrible things in the world in the name of Christ. And so we have to be able to understand that. But the average everyday Israeli that you're going to meet, they're not going to be seeking that out, nor is the average everyday Palestinian for the most part. Most people just want to live in peace. They want to feed their families. And what's being driven are men in power on both sides that want to seek destruction and malice on the other ones. And they don't care who they have to harm in the way. And that's the scary part about that. And that's something that usually, honestly, doesn't get solved by war. Nothing is going to get solved by this war that we're seeing right now. The only way to solve this is politically. The only way to solve this is creating some type of bridge. And honestly, as the church, that bridge is Jesus. That bridge is what Jesus preaches, to love our enemies before anything else. Yesterday, I even just preached a sermon on Luke chapter 4, where I talked about the reality that you look at Israel at that point, that they want to, that Jesus makes a messianic claim that Isaiah 61 is taking place amongst their midst, and he is the fulfillment of that. And they're all excited about that. But then he goes on one step further and he says, yeah, but the Messiah, the mercy, the grace of God, it's for your enemies too. And then they want to drag him out and they want to stone him on Mount Precipice. And that's the reality of it, is that the gospel that Jesus's life leads into is the reality of the answer to the problem. But you have two sides that cannot see that. And therefore there will always be war no matter what, simply because, as I said before, the world wants to destroy Israel as a way of refuting God's promise.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges I see is our algorithms and how they're so different. And I talk to friends, and it's hard when you watch one video and you like that video, then all of a sudden you go down this rabbit hole, you get 1,000 more. And so if you're going into this on, well, Israel is on the right side of history here, you're going to get more and more of that. If you're going into this to say Israel is committing, terms like genocide or things like that are very common now, accusations. I also think that's something we've seen, that terminology is changing, where the word racism, the word genocide, the word Nazi, the word all these things are synonymous with like you're being dumb, which is a very, I think, important distinction that unfortunately has happened. I do struggle that you have, again, war in general, like is so devastating. And we've not yet seen, even World War I, World War II, even the Cold War. I mean, you didn't have the level of video and ability to almost experience this. Again, I think that's why the Charlie Kirk thing was so impactful, because everyone saw it happen. And it's just this heinous evil. And so it is something, as discernment is so needed to where things can be evil all around. And unfortunately, I think that's what the enemy is trying to do, and he's trying to destroy. And again, my natural disposition is one of skepticism. It's one to say, I ask the question, and I at least personally, I feel like I've not, the difference between when you've heard something versus when you've understood it versus when you believe it.
Yes. 100%.
And I feel like with where I'm at with Israel, I'm being very, very candid and vulnerable here, but where I'm at is I've heard it and I think I understand it, but I don't know that I really believe it yet. Yeah. And I think part of that is because of the experiences that I've had, and I would say the same about the other side too. Yeah. I'm not saying like I've heard it and I understood it and I believe it about why I support, the Palestinian people, or obviously nobody should support Hamas. Of course, Absolutely. Like I think we're all in agreement on that. But it is this tension that I feel of I kind of understand, I start to understand more, but I think the best way that I've understood and maybe believed, or at least felt it, is when I lived in Lebanon. I've traveled around, as I mentioned, in Jordan and a bunch of different Arab countries. And when I was there, it was actually a time of peace, and probably at Lebanon's height of their recent prosperity. Back in the 60s, 70s, they were very prosperous. They called it the Paris of the Middle East. There's a good movie with I think John Hamm is in it, called Beirut. But prosperous country, war destroyed it, decimated it. I was there in 2015. It's like height of its comeback. They hadn't been at war for like 11 or 12 years, which in that part of the world is a long time.
Great, that's a great period of peace right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I remember that Syria had just fallen, and Beirut had 2 million Lebanese people that were there, and then 1 million Syrians. So the city ballooned by 33%. I mean, grew by 50%. Now 33% of the people are Syrian refugees. So you have this complete reshuffling of the cards. And what I found was, even among Christians, which sounds so mind-boggling to people maybe in America, but among Christians, there was this massive I don't love the term racism, but clear prejudice against the Syrians and the Lebanese. And then also you had a lot of Palestinians. You have a lot of people from other nations. And I talked to one person who was a Christian. He said, I can't love the Syrian, which again starts to make scripture come alive, to where you go, wait, there's turmoil, there's division. Again, this is not between Palestine and Israel, and between Palestinian and Jewish people. This is between people, neighbors. Yeah. And he said, I can't love them. Do you know how evil they were to us 40 years ago when Syria had the power? And now that they need our help, we're not supposed to help them. We're not supposed to care for them because they were terrible. He said, I remember my father and my grandfather sharing about the evils and atrocities that the Syrian people would do to us Lebanese and the Palestinians that live here. He said, I cannot love the Syrian. And I think about that and I go, okay, there is something that I think, are sheltered from sometimes in this part of the world. We're starting to see it with the division that we're experiencing with politics. But in that part of the world, this division is nothing new. It goes back to the times of a Samaritan. You're talking about a pagan or a Jewish person. All these people, you're talking about a Philistine. Oh my goodness. The animosity and the evil. And again, racism, I think, doesn't even clarify what it means. It's more, they could look identical.
It's blood hatred.
Totally. And so I think that it opened it up for me to realize that maybe there's more to this than just a political jockeying.
Absolutely.
It is a spiritual reality, and that's why the power of forgiveness, I think, is so strong. And so when you say, how does this get solved? Well, certainly there's a political reality. Whether you believe that the Israel government is using the United States and their Zionism as a way to get political power, you may believe that. You may believe that the other side is completely demonic and evil and under the power of Satan. And you may believe all different things, but what is the solution? And I think that's where we must come to the agreement, where you don't hear a lot of that, but it's like the solution must be obviously prayer. But that's why I think you do have young people that go, if the solution is Christ and is Jesus, I look at maybe the wickedness or the evil. Like I don't see Jesus preached in Israel. And so how can I wrestle through that dichotomy? I look at some of the scriptures, Romans 9, again, we talk about Romans 8 through 12 and really the whole book of Romans, but not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. So, okay. There's a lot of people that say, exactly. Doesn't mean we should protect them. But then you look at Romans 11, Israel's experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come. And in this way, all of Israel will be saved. And then he quotes Isaiah 59, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godless away from Jacob. Okay. So there seems to be this back and forth throughout Romans that's hard to process and hard to understand. So if you pick a few of the verses in Romans, you say, clearly we shouldn't support Israel.
Exactly.
And then you pick another few. And so that's where I think we find ourselves as a nation, as a people, is what verses are you cherry picking?
Exactly.
And what social media clips are you watching?
Yes. And Romans is probably the key for us as Christians, and we have to read it in the full context and understand that Paul is talking to members of Israel inside the church, because the church is predominantly Jewish. And we know that without a shadow of doubt with Romans, because he's constantly making reference and allusion to the Old Testament. That's something that doesn't work inside Gentile churches. When we look, for example, in Acts 17 or in 1 Thessalonians, there's no reference to the Old Testament. There's no reference to Judaism or any bits of that, because the audience wouldn't understand it. But in Romans, it's a completely different story. And so he's talking to people who have accepted Jesus as the Messiah, who are of Jewish background, that are wrestling with, well, what about my fellow countrymen? And even Paul's wrestling with that and referencing it too, because he's been abused at their hands. And so we can't cherry pick anything in that. We have to read it in the full context of it all. And even Paul's not the only one that's dealing with that. John's dealing with that in Revelation, because you look at the only two churches that receive a letter in Revelation that have no condemnation for Jesus. It's Smyrna and Philadelphia. And both of them talks about the synagogue of Satan, where he has to clarify that there are those who claim to be Jews but are not, that are persecuting the church. And what most scholars would say that John is saying there is that he's making a distinction between what defines someone's Jewishness or someone falling under the covenant of God is their relationship with God and their desire to fulfill his will and desire to fulfill the covenant, which that synagogue's not doing, which Paul is talking about those individuals inside Israel that are not doing inside his day, which is evident when we look at the New Testament period from a historical standpoint. You see the wickedness that's taking place inside the temple that really results in the great Jewish revolt. And so we might even at this time be seeing somewhat of a parallel of that. I mean, you look at the Israeli government, you look at what's taking place with, for example, Netanyahu and everything in his trial that's taking place of corruption and bribery. It's something that's instilled at the highest level of the Israeli government. Are we seeing parallels to that inside the New Testament? And we're wrestling with the understanding of the same thing that Paul was wrestling with in his day. Because for Paul, it's an answered question, as you just said, that all Israel will be saved. But he's kind of asking the question as to, but why? Why do they deserve it? What's with all of this?
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of people asking that exact question now, and to say, as people, as Christians, again, this is a Christian podcast. There's a political view, there's an American view, there's all sorts of things. But as a Christian view, again, I look at this and I think, unfortunately, when people ask questions like this, at least in my experience, and I'm not trying to sow any further division, but I feel like when they ask questions like this, it almost feels like oh my gosh, how could you ask? But almost to the sense of, they've rejected Jesus. They are not Messianic Jews. These are people that, and again, I'm not trying to be anti here, but just trying to ask the question that I think a lot of people are asking, that people are asking me. Well, if these are the people that rejected Jesus back to where it's like, God says, forgive them. Certainly we want to forgive, but over time, they've not come under the authority of Jesus. They continue to reject him.
Yeah.
They continue to do this. It's like there's almost this lack of sympathy in the sense of, well, Israel's not a Christian nation. And so it's this like, I'm a Christian person.
Yeah.
I follow Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not Jewish. I'm a Gentile. I love Jesus. And then you have the people of the promise that continue to reject them, that reject him, that reject him. It almost feels like, again, kind of like the prodigal son in some senses, where you're saying, what are we talking about here? Like these people don't even, they reject that Jesus is God. Jesus is God, right? So what, like, I feel when I say that, or when others say that, it's like, well, that's a stupid question.
Yes.
And I feel like, I don't think that's a stupid question. No. And so how would you respond to somebody that feels that way, to the sense of, I love the lands. I agree this is where Jesus walked. I love the from a political standpoint, I love a more free society than a less free society, a place where we're free to practice religions. And I believe that's a better society to live in. I think there's a political reality to that. But from these are the people that we should protect because of a potential future promise, that's where I think people struggle, because they see all this dichotomy and they go, but what about the Christians?
Yes.
And again, it's a unique rabbit trail that you could go down a lot of different places. But where do you go from there?
So this is where the experiential part really comes into it. Why I tell people you need to go to the land to experience it before you ever formulate an opinion, because there
Do you hear that question though?
all the time. And especially you hear it pushed of, well, there are Christians in Gaza,
Right.
almost like Christians don't exist or there are no Christians inside Israel. And there are definitely messianic communities. One of our teachers who does trips with River Valley, David Emanuel, was part of a messianic community in Israel for 13 years that's still running strong 20 years after he's left. And we know people from this. And you have tons of messianic Jewish people, and you have tons of Christian Arabs that live in the land and Christians that have come from other places to live inside the land. And you always hear this, well, there are Christians inside Gaza, and there's less than 1,000 Christians in Gaza.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's almost no Christian population there because it's been squeezed out. And the same thing, Bethlehem, for example, before the Palestinian Authority took over, was 90% Christian. Right now, it's about 8% Christian. And they're all
because
fleeing.
they've moved, or
they've been driven out because of persecution. We at the Center for Holy Land Studies have literally helped resettle one of the families that we have worked with for years inside Bethlehem in the Kansas City area, because it has been so difficult for them during COVID and now with this that they're forced to work into tourism. That's one of the laws that has been put out there, and they can't survive. There's been no tourism since 2020. And so what do? And the Palestinian Authority tells them that they can't do X, Y, and Z. They have no hope. And that's the Palestinian Authority's goal. And so you hear these things that are stated of, well, there are Christians there. And you're like, yes, but this is a Muslim government, which has nothing to do with Christianity, fighting against an individual people group that, yes, have rejected Jesus or don't understand Jesus, I think would be the better statement of it, but still share, as I said, the Old Testament and still have a bridge. And here's the thing that messes people up when they come to Israel with us oftentimes, because they will come across certain individuals that don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah, but love the Lord their God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. We take our groups to a Bible store. It's what a biblical store is what they call it, I guess, where everything they sell has biblical points to it. And the man who runs it, his name is Moshe. His brother Dove works with him, and he allows groups to come in, and he talks about how him as an Orthodox Jew understands Christianity and why things are the way that they are. But he allows them to ask any question they've always wanted to ask an Orthodox Jew. And in April, for example, I brought a group of pastors to Israel, and they were asking them every single question that they could think of. And when they walk out of that, there's no question in their mind that, man, he loves God and studies his word and knows God even better than I do in some aspects. And other stories, you take people to worship at the Western Wall on Shabbat, and you see those who are or Israeli and Jewish that are worshiping God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. And it looks very similar to a Pentecostal church service. And you have pastors that break down crying because inside their minds, they've had this one picture and this idea, and they can't rectify the idea of somebody who loves the same God that they do and yet rejects Jesus. And I think this is the heart of what we're seeing with what Paul's saying of all Israel will be saved. He's talking about these individuals who love God and have a passion and want to and desire to worship their Father will eventually have their eyes illuminated in that aspect. And so when you have people of that nature that you're interacting with, it does definitely change your understanding and your interaction of maybe there's more to this than I thought. Maybe things aren't as cut and dry and easy to write someone off as I think. And you look at Israel, and Israel is far closer to us as a faith, us as a people group. And I'll say this, is that in the last few years, specifically after October 7th, I've had more secular Israelis ask me about the gospel, ask me about Jesus than ever before. Why? Because they're seeing that there might be an answer to something else rather than this generational hate that they've held since their grandparents' day. And so when we look at them, yes, we might use the term that they've rejected Jesus. I think the reality is that they don't understand Jesus. And in large part, that is because of the church misrepresenting Jesus. Because the reality is, if you talk to any Jew, this is what my friend Moshe says, if you talk to any Jew, they're not 40, 50, 60 years old. They're 3,000 years old. They have a long history. And you look at what the church has done to the Jewish people in the 1930s and the 1940s. What was the symbol of the Wehrmacht of Germany? It was the Iron Cross. Germany itself was proclaiming Lutheranism. Martin Luther is quoted more than anybody else in Mein Kampf. And when you have members of the Nazi Party at Nuremberg who are brought to their deaths, they literally say, well, we were just doing what Martin Luther told us. Martin Luther has a book that nobody wants to talk about. Everybody wants to talk about the Reformation. Nobody wants to talk about Martin Luther's book, Against the Jews and Their Lies, where he opens up saying the Jews should be wrapped in their Torah scrolls and burned alive in their synagogues. Here is the person who the church puts up every October 31st and celebrates, that the Jewish people look at and say, this person called for our death. And that's a staple of the Christian world, the Protestant world. Well, why would I want anything to do with the Jesus that he proclaims? The Spanish Inquisition, like I've referenced it, the Crusades. We oftentimes think the Crusades were the Christians against the Muslims. No, it's the Christians against anybody who wasn't them. The Catholics are slaughtering the Greek Orthodox. They're sacking Constantinople. They're killing every Jewish community they come across unless they convert. And so the Jewish people remember this. And one of the things that I've had said to me multiple times by Jewish individuals in Israel is that we just don't know when that handshake from a Christian is going to turn into a knife being driven into our backs. Why? Because they've experienced it firsthand. There are still those who walk among us in Israel who bear the numbers of Auschwitz on their arm. How can I go and tell them that the Jesus that the men who put their family members inside those ovens proclaims is different than the Jesus that I proclaim? And the only way to really do that is by example and by interaction and creating relationships. And so when I deal with missionaries, for example, in Israel, they have a very difficult job because the only way that they can get into the circles and spread the gospels is by showing the people that they live amongst that there truly is something different from them. And Israel now looks at all of these Christian countries, the US and Europe, and they see some horrific things right now with the rise of anti-Semitism, and they don't know any difference in Christianity. They don't know that the Lutherans are different than the Episcopals are different than the Anglicans are different than the Pentecostals are different than Baptists. All they know is Christians proclaim Christ, and we're all the same. And it takes a lot of undoing. And it's something that we can't do in our own lifetime. And the church has failed at miserably for the past 1,000 years. And so I put more of the blame of Israel's rejection of Jesus in the modern day on the church than I do on Israel any other way. That's why I say it's a misunderstanding than anything else, because we've failed to represent Jesus to them. We've failed to represent what gospel worship is.
It's thought-provoking because there's a pain that a lot of people have not seen or experienced. I mean, you actually have many now that are denying the Holocaust numbers, and I don't really know where they get all of that information. I've watched some of the videos to just try and understand, and it feels a bit odd. The place that I think my head goes, and maybe it's a bad place to go, but I do think there's this thought of, I look at Jesus and how he's my savior, he's my Lord, and so there is this rejection component that I feel like in some ways Paul is lamenting in Romans to this, you talk about these atrocities that have been done in the name of Christ. I think all of us who are true followers would say that's false religion. That's false. It's not true. The cross, the way that it was done was a false pretext. I mean, you have the slavery in America. It's like, well, there's been a lot of Christians that promoted that. It's like, yeah, I would say Christians in name only, just like the Nazi Party, anyone who would claim to be a Lutheran, true Lutherans, no, that's not what we believe, but of course you do have this history. I think, you look at Luther, it reminds me of that conversation I had in Lebanon. It's, well, not them, right? In his mind, and I think in a lot of Christians' minds, like, you're talking about the people that killed my Savior.
Yeah.
You're talking about those people. And I think the us versus them is that component. You look in the same with Islam. You're talking about the radicals, you're talking about the terrorists, you're talking about this. And I do think it creates this, it all is an us versus them component. And that's the challenge, because you go in Christ, we are all one in Christ.
Yeah.
And so whether Jew, Gentile, slave, free, man, woman, Greek, it is this dying to yourself tension. And the problem is the solution is found on an individual level. And I think we're trying to solve it in a collective level.
Yes.
Some have asked the question, recently, can you receive or ask for collective forgiveness? And I think there's some concepts of that in Scripture, but I don't know that there's a depth of theology for collective forgiveness. I think God can.
Yeah.
But I think for us it's an individual forgiveness.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the challenge in it all. It's like we're trying to solve these problems of evil and hatred and war and, is it just, is it not? And the truth is, every one of us has an individual responsibility.
Yeah.
And, it opens up these different cans, and I've met Moshe and Marty, he talked about him a couple weeks ago. And, I meet these people, but then I also look at my theology and I say, at least from what I understand, I don't believe in the dual covenant in the sense of like, if you reject Christ, like I believe in a future restoration that, from my understanding of what Israel's restoration is, that their eyes will be open to see that Jesus is the Messiah.
Yes.
But then also you have these people that it's like they might die before that comes, and so that grieves me.
It does.
And so it is this like tension to, do I believe that there will be those who are descendants, who are the people of God in the Old Testament, that will come to know Jesus Lord? I do believe that, and there have been many that have done that. But I also look and I go, if somebody dies, whether they follow all the laws of the Levitical laws, even to a T, the 631 or whatever it is, if they do that, my theological understanding would be, unless they accept and surrender their life to Christ, that they will be separate. And I think that is the tension to where it's like, I think the heart says, I want a dual covenant theology, because I love these people and I see their reverence. But I think the same could be said about Islam. Now, certainly it's a very different 600 versus thousands of years later. You have Islam, and then you have modern Islam called Mormonism, and I look at that and their reverence and their desire, and it's this. But that's not what gets us in.
No,
it's not our reverence or desire. Even those who would go to church every Sunday, but that haven't yet surrendered. So I think that's the tension of it all. Is like I love the land of Israel. I see this with family members of mine that go to Israel that just have this. Again, the Lord speaks to them so clearly. They see it, and they love the Jewish people. And there is, again, of the older generation, I think has experienced a lot of the war and all of this, and their heart for the people of Israel, because they realized Jesus was a Jew, and there's a promise, and there's a reconciliation coming towards the Father, but it's not yet here. And again, that's just this tension of it all, where I struggle to manage like this small example of the war right now with Gaza and Israel. It is a massive deal to the people that are in it. But in the scope of the entire story, it's a small bit of that story. And I think that's the thing that just messes with my head. So I don't even know if I have a question there, but it's just...
No, it's just the processing aspect, which is why, like I said, when you have these people that come and they see it and they start breaking down and cry, it's that same tension and processing it of how can I understand that this person loves God and yet will miss the mark at the end of the day, as far as we believe when we talk about Jesus being the only way to the Father. And that's the part that people struggle with. They want that dual covenant as well. They want that. Or
they want universalism. I mean, that's what you see now. It's just like, everybody gets in. Because God is so loving. And of course, a loving God would let everybody in.
Absolutely. And so it becomes a big struggle for people that come to the land and just see that and experience that firsthand, because they have the desire and they build these relationships where I want this person to know Jesus just for the heavenly aspect of it.
Yeah. And then you mix in politics, you mix in nations, you mix in ethnic hatred. You mix in all of these things, and your gumbo pot starts to look pretty crazy. And very difficult to discern. And I think where I find myself is, Lord, I pray for peace. Lord, I pray for salvation. I pray that as I go, to these places, that you would illuminate your word so that I can live this out better. You talk about all of these, people who they use the Bible, but they haven't opened the Bible.
Correct.
Or if they opened it to the one verse that they wanted to utilize. And Luther and others, we're flawed people. And I hope that we grow by looking at that, at others' flaws, and we can learn from them so we don't have to learn ourselves. But I do find that this topic, it's not going away.
No.
And that's something that I find difficult. When I was in Lebanon and I visited Israel for the first time, they pulled me aside very kindly at first, and then they started questioning me, and then they took all my things, and then they went through my phone, and they were, again, this American 19, 20-year-old, but they were very seriously going through everything I had and questioning me. The team left, they went to their hotel, and I'm there. They have no idea what's going on because I can't call them because they took my phone, and they're going through everything, and it's because there's this hatred and this evil and this. Again, I lived in a place that hated them. In Lebanon, you can't even say the word Israel.
Yeah.
If you say it, it's like you might get in trouble. They call it the nation to the south, or other terms that are even more derogatory.
Yeah.
So it is this crazy tension that I think it's almost like living in the United States during the Civil War.
Yeah.
But forever.
Yes.
It's never
constant state.
Yeah. Even if there's peace, like we joked earlier, 11 years. Oh, wow. That's a long stretch.
Yeah.
For those who are, interested, again, we've talked about theology, we've talked about politics, we've talked about visiting. What would be your hope for people when they go and experience, there's other trips, there's Greece, there's Italy, there's Turkey, but particularly we're talking about Israel here. What's your hope for people that they come away, they leave with? When they go, they do a trip with you, they do a trip with the center, and they say, this is what I leave with. What would you hope that a American Christian, again, predominantly who we're talking to here, shows up? What would you hope when they go home? What do you hope they feel? What do you hope they experience when they go and visit the
For us,
nation?
it's a deeper understanding of God's word and God's calling on their life that becomes alive in a new way. The politics is part of it because it's Israel, but it's never something that we focus on. You can find tons of groups, and specifically Christian and church-run groups, that want to take people over to create ambassadors to Israel, and they want to create like a political machine of people who are loyal to Israel. That's not why we exist in the least bit. We'll answer the questions when they come up, and we can even show certain things, but our focus is never that. Our focus is for the growth and development of what God is doing inside the churches. And so for us, it's literally walking away with a deeper desire to know your word. For us, the focus becomes more on the importance of the fact that the church is becoming so biblically illiterate, especially as we move into a technology age. People are getting their devotions, they're getting their Bibles from maybe a text message here or there, but they're not sitting down and interacting with their word and digesting their word. And when people walk away from trips, we want them to be hungry and desirous of, I need to figure out what God's word says so I can better understand what God is doing in my life. And so that's the sole focus of all that we do. And everything else kind of just comes at the backdrop of, this is just a part of it because it's there. Do we want people to understand the situation in Israel? Absolutely. One of the things that we've more recently started doing is creating opportunities to bring people to the areas that were attacked on October 7th to figure out what it is that they're hearing about. Because here's the thing, you hear about October 7th, but I can ask many individuals, how many videos have you seen from October 7th? Most people have only seen a couple of them, but you've seen tons of videos from Gaza and everything like that. And it's because most of the videos that the people from Hamas who perpetrated October 7th posted themselves have slowly been taken down off the internet, and they were horrific. But if you go to Kfar Aza, for example, and you see the houses where people were murdered, where they were lined up against the walls and men, women, and children were shot, and you go and see the kindergarten where there are bullet holes in each of the stalls in the bathroom where they walked in to make sure there were no kids hiding in there, and you see the playgrounds where people hid in slides that are shot up, you realize the devastation, the evil that takes place, and it does retool your mind. But that by no means is by any bit our focus of doing things. Those are just those things that we add onto the side of, you're here to know your Bible, you're here to grow closer to God, but if you want to know the real story, we'll take you to the places.
Yeah, and I think it's an example of the evil, just around us and everywhere. I mean, when I was in Lebanon, there's buildings blown up. There's war all over the place. And it's something I think we're not used to.
No.
Where in our nation, even the wars that have happened within our nation are far distant history. Nobody alive today experienced the Civil War.
No.
And so there's the further back in history it goes, the more it becomes a relic of the past rather than a reality of the current situation. Yeah. Something that I'd love to end on a little bit more of like a fun note in some senses. And maybe it'll be fun for you, maybe not.
Talking about wars, not fun.
But yeah, I mean, but it's true. It's true. It's a reality, that part of the world. I think if you totally ignore that when you're there, it doesn't paint the whole picture either.
No, absolutely.
Because I mean, even you look throughout the Bible, I mean, you read the story of David and Goliath, and it's like, oh, it was a very pivotal battle, because if they were to take over, then they would have had a straight shot right up to Jerusalem, and it's very geopolitical. So the Bible, although the entire story is in our view, of course, about this story of the Messiah, a story of Jesus, that from Old Testament to New Testament, there is a ton of geopolitics involved.
It's all
particularly throughout the entire, you read Kings, you read Chronicles, you read, I mean, all these stories of the nations that are fighting against each other and the people groups. And
even in Jesus' ministry, they want it to be about geopolitics.
It's true.
You have a zealot following Jesus, and you've got even John the Baptist seemingly wanting Jesus to kind of overthrow the Romans before he's killed, asking that question of, are you the one, or should we expect another? Like Peter wants to kill himself some Romans. Judas probably arguably. So you've got these individuals that are following Jesus, like, all right, we're going to decimate our enemies. It's from the beginning to the end, basically.
Yeah, which is funny that's how the people were then, and in a lot of ways that's how the people are now. And it hasn't changed.
No.
Our nature. It's what war can we get ourselves involved in, which is so crazy in a modern era where we really don't need to be doing this.
No.
There's no reason. Even from a protection standpoint, it's like I think we're better people in this, but you still see Russia and Ukraine. You still see Sudan. You still see Myanmar. You still see these places around the world that are continuing to do this despite our modern technology. That hasn't solved human nature.
No.
That hasn't solved sin.
It comes down to the reality of there is evil in the world. And I think that's part of the problem with our situation in the U.S. right now, where our younger generation has no idea that real evil exists. And I deal with this. I talk about this in the classroom. So I grew up in New York City area, and I remember September 11th very vividly from my 5th grade classroom, seeing the smoke rise up in a distance and seeing people walking through the streets covered in ash about 3:00 in the afternoon, knowing kind of the realities. And I talked to my students about the evil that was perpetrated that day. We just passed the anniversary, and I grew up with kids who their parents passed away, and I still think about them now 24 years later and still pray for them, knowing what they had to go through. And you talk about that to the younger generation, they have no concept and no mindset of it. And if you think back and remember what the United States looked like on September 10th, you didn't have any understanding that evil really existed, and you saw evil played out right there. And I think we as a society, without any of these interactions, we don't think that evil exists. And when we let our guard down, that's when evil really does come up. And what we saw on October 7th was pure evil. And what we see with Ukraine and Russia is an attack of pure evil. There's the reality of evil that will never be stomped out in this world, that will always create those issues.
Yeah, the worldview in which you grow up, I think we often underplay the significance of how much that affects the way you view all of these things. I think, people that grew up in the Cold War, they were used to getting under their desks because they thought that Russia might drop a nuclear bomb. But children now are used to running lockdown drills because of all the school shootings.
Yep.
A very different feeling. It was the threat from afar of the other versus a threat from within.
Yeah.
The way that you think about culture and the world is so different when you're constantly on edge thinking that the people within my own community could be after me versus we should stick together so that we can fight a war against others. And I think obviously that is the message of the church is rather than thinking, internally look at, that church or that denomination or this or that, it's versus turning to say, no, this battle is not between flesh and blood.
Yeah.
This battle is between the darkness, the principalities, the spiritual realm. And I hope and I pray that in this turmoil, that the church would be united around that. And instead of turning inward and trying to fight these battles within, that they would turn outwards. But I think because of the generation that is so used to feeling like the other side is evil, someone might come in and that one of my classmates might kill me.
Yes.
That I think has caused a tension that many who are older don't realize why they're so on edge.
Yeah.
Because they literally feel like one of you might take me out.
Exactly.
And so that's just a dichotomy where it's like the older generation feels like we need to stick together to fight against the evils.
Yeah.
And they're saying, you might be evil, you know, you might be the one that takes me out. And so I think that's hard for them to process.
And I think that's going back to the Israel-Gaza situation that we see right now. That's the reality of it that we in the West don't understand. They've grown up with this existential threat of rockets and stuff like that. But now October 7th changed the game because you had these people that were coming out of Gaza working on the farms and working in the communities because they could make so much more money working in Israel that were gaining information and selling it off to Hamas and giving them the opportunity to go and to methodologically kill who they needed to kill in order to have the greatest effect. And so now you've got Israelis saying, well, we welcome this person into our home. This person was our house cleaner. This person picked the fruit out in our fields, and they're the ones that sold us out looking for us to die. Who can I trust now except someone of my own? And it creates that more of that them versus us idea that is becoming so much more prominent that doesn't leave you. It's something that stays with you for the rest of your life because it happens in formative years.
Yeah. Yeah, I said like 10 minutes ago, here, we're going to end with a little fun, and then we continued. Here's my question.
Yeah.
Where Israel fits in end times, you know, we at the time of this recording, we just survived the rapture predictions.
Yes, we did.
So praise God that we're here, and maybe it was a couple days early, so maybe this episode will never come out. You know, you have to be ready at any time. Where do you find? I think some of this and a lot of this does come from the end times, like the Israel is going to be restored. When it comes to the land itself, where do you see, you know, new heavens, new earth, new Jerusalem? What is your take? And again, I say fun because I think in theological circles, I think there's probably a lot of grace around eschatology, you know, maybe in our movement, not as much.
Yes.
But as somebody you've been to Israel all this time, would you say, well, I'm going there because that's where I'm going to spend the rest of eternity, you know, or what is your view? Do you have any unpopular opinions? Maybe you're not allowed to share them on a podcast, but when you think of the fulfillment of the end times, the new heavens, the new earth, the garden city, all of that, like, again, I know we could talk for another hour about this, but where do you find yourself? Like, where's your heart at? Where's your head at regarding the end times of Israel? And we can go down any rabbit hole there, but I figured it'd be like, rather than
it's a fun one.
Rather than talking about war the whole time.
Yeah, I get asked this by my students quite a bit, and it's funny because I tell them I'm an expert on Revelation chapter 1 through 3. After that, it's a guessing game. And listen, I know what the New Testament tells us, that all Israel will be saved, and how that plays out, I honestly have no idea. There are two things that I personally kind of shy away from when I talk in an academic world or an academic level, and that is creationism and end times. And I have the idea of I wasn't there, I won't be there, and so I'm gonna just place it in the hands of God and let God be God, and I'm happy with whatever it is. This whole obsession with the rapture, it's funny in many ways, but it's also very sickening, and it shows a reality of the church that I don't think the church really wants to wrestle with, that needs to wrestle with. And I actually think that that's a big part of the church's obsession with Israel. It's because we want this end times to come. I think about people that for generations, every generation thinks that this is the end time. Since the day that Peter says that we're in the end of days, whatever that truly means, every generation has thought that the end times is here. And we think about, let's say, our grandparents' generation, where Hitler is ravaging through Europe and the Jewish people are being exterminated. Well, for sure, that's going to be the end times, right? The rapture is going to come, or however we see it.
What about the Black Death when a third of the world dies?
Exactly it. And so every generation sits there, and we look at really what we're told, that how bad the world needs to progress. And we see the realities of it. The world is progressing at a very bad rate, but I always tell people that we're nowhere near as bad as the Romans were. The Romans were bad. And so I don't think I will be alive for it, but that's not the point. That's not the point that any Christian should ever dwell on it. It's the idea that Jesus could come back tomorrow, the end times could be tomorrow, and I'm supposed to live my life today as if it's my very last day. And if I get tomorrow, then I do the same thing tomorrow, each and every day until the Lord calls me home, until I'm with him in paradise. And so when I look at the greater scheme of Israel, I have no necessarily vision or views of this is how it's going to play out. This is what it's going to be. I guarantee when we talk about like the final battle that takes place, Armageddon. Yes, I think that will absolutely happen. I think we see the stage set for that again and again over the course of history, whether it's in the Roman period, whether it's in the Crusader period. It's a hot spot where people are drawn to, where you have now especially the faith of Islam, the faith of Christianity, the faith of Judaism, all being drawn to Jerusalem and it being a point of tension. Yeah.
Do you think that is like the Megiddo area, or do you think that's like
it's
just
Jerusalem?
Okay.
Most solid scholars, even at this point now, if you go on Wikipedia will challenge the idea of it because it's more so been on the forefront since the early 1900s when you have some early theologians that really start understanding Hebrew and realizing, okay, no, it's not, Megiddo doesn't make sense. And now it's becoming a much more common view across the board. You have multiple scholars who have now published significantly on it.
It also just makes way more sense.
It makes way more sense. For those who don't know what we're talking about, the prominent view has always been that Armageddon is the mountain of Megiddo, which never made sense. Instead of taking the G sound that's being transliterated into Greek from the Gimel in Hebrew, which traditionally makes the G sound, from an ayin, which can make the G sound. That's actually how Gaza is spelt. It's spelt with an ayin rather than a gimel. And using that, and when you switch the ayin out, it becomes the Mount of the Assembly, which is Isaiah and Ezekiel's way of describing the Temple Mount, saying that the battle is going to take place at the Temple Mount, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it makes sense with the abomination of desolation and right at the temple. I mean, it makes too much sense.
It does. And so for me, I see that as, that I feel like that's perfect. That lines up exactly with what we're seeing. But the rest of it, there's so much imagery that's being used, and the book of Revelation is a piece of apocalyptic literature from the first century Jewish corpus. It's a Jewish text, and you have imagery that is so common inside that and Enoch and other things that you have to understand it inside the whole genre. And we can't just sit there and say, well, we know what this is, we know what this is, we know what this is, because I think that creates a false understanding. And so I just kind of sit back and say, you know what? Israel has a plan. I'm told that all Israel will be saved. I'm told that there will be the 144,000. And from that, I have faith in that, and I don't think I'll be here for it. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, people say about the rapture predictions, they say one person's going to be right. And so of all the predictions, and where I'm at is in kind of that same vein, is I say, my generation still has a chance to be right, that we will be a part of that, So all the previous predictions of those who thought they were the last generation, they were wrong. But I still got a chance.
No, we got Harold Camping coming up here. It was 18 predictions before he died or something like that. And everyone, I miscalculated. I did this. Yeah.
Yeah. The video of the main person that was talking about the rapture a few weeks ago, I saw his video is now deleted.
Is it?
Yeah. So sorry, was wrong on that one.
On Tuesday, I was down to Houston, Texas, and I had amazing barbecue, and I was okay if the rapture was going to happen that afternoon, because I could see Jesus and be happy after that barbecue.
There you go. Yeah. I think that you've brought so much perspective to us. Obviously, I think people listening would love to go and be a part of a trip. I do want to give that opportunity for those. Maybe there's a pastor that's listening and says, I've never been able to do that. I've always desired to put a trip together. I've always desired to bring people in my church throughout the steps of Paul, or throughout Turkey, or throughout Israel. What would be your recommendation for them? I think both for individuals who want to go, as well as for pastors who want to organize. Are you accepting new applications for trips? Are
Always.
You full? Where does the center find themselves for those that say, all right, I got to do it, I got to get there, and maybe I want to bring a bunch of people with me?
as of the course of our history, we will make every opportunity, even when our calendar is full, to get people there to the lands of the Bible, because that's why we exist. That's our purpose. We're not a travel agency. We're a ministry that focuses on understanding of biblical literacy and biblical engagement. And so we want every church, and even though we're a ministry inside the Assemblies of God, you don't have to be an Assemblies of God church to be with us. We've had Baptist churches, we've had ARC churches, we've had everything. And so we're super excited for anybody who wants to go and see the lands of the Bible come alive. And we want to make that opportunity. And so the best way is just looking on our website, thechls.org, and you can see our trips. We have open trips for groups that, say, a pastor just wants to go, he wants to fill it out and to come and to join, or take a few people. And then we have other church groups that we sometimes are able to combine churches and have multiple churches that maybe they have 10 people each or so, but we always are taking we don't have necessarily applications. It's just basically call us or email us, and we start the process there of, okay, what the dates are the dates you're looking for? What is your goal with this? Where do you want to go? And we'll go from there. And the unique aspect about the Center for Holy Land Studies is that on each of our trips, we send a expert inside the land, an expert Bible teacher. I have myself, Dr. Jeffrey Garcia from Gordon College, Dr. David Emanuel from Westmont College, Dr. Mark Jenkins from Evangel University. They make up our teacher corpus, and we send a teacher with every single trip, because most companies, when you interact with them, they're just going to give you an Israeli guide who knows his Bible and he knows nominal Christianity. He's probably been brought up inside the college and taught Christianity by a Catholic or something like that doesn't necessarily understand what the church groups and is engaged in ministry. And all our professors and teachers are engaged in ministry as a result, so that they can speak into the lives of the people that much deeper, and not just bring an academic perspective, but truly a spiritually enriching perspective for the church itself. And our focus is really discipleship and creating a pathway for the church to be able to disciple its members in inland, and also create something new inside them that makes them even more effective for what the goal of building the kingdom of God inside the local church is. And I know, for example, River Valley has been huge on that. And I've had that conversation with Pastor Rob about just the importance of having that time and that spiritual moment of being able to speak into their lives, because there's nothing like it. And so absolutely, just go to thechls.org. You'll see all our contact information, our phone number to call, our email. And if you're interested in coming to the lands of the Bible, whether it's Israel, Turkey, Greece, Italy, Egypt, Jordan, Cyprus, looking at adding Malta soon, anywhere where the Bible takes place, we would love to be the ones that take you on that experience and let you understand and experience God inside the lands where he had his word come alive.
Yeah, it's very cool. And we at River Valley, we call them global experience trips. Mm-hmm. We do a number of them all throughout different parts of the world, and excited to get back on one. And just thank you for your wisdom, for bringing new perspectives, maybe challenging, sharing your heart and emotion, as well as somebody who's been there countless times. You've been there and seen it. And I encourage anybody to do that, regardless of where you find yourself on the current war and the current challenges that are happening, that, again, unfortunately, that has persisted. I mean, there's rarely been a time where people have gone there where there's not a rumor of war or a war.
Correct.
You know, and Jesus himself says, you're going to hear rumors of war. There's going to be wars. That's not the sign. Those are always going to happen all around the world. And so I'd encourage people to go and just dig in to learn about it. And I know they'll come back with a new perspective. Yeah. And Jeremy, thank you for your time today. Glad you were in town to do this. And until next time, thanks so much for talking church today.
Thanks for having me.